Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he's hoping to approve more funding for the Small Business Paycheck Protection Program this week. Joining us now to talk more about aid for America's businesses, Senator Kevin Cramer, Senator of North Dakota, Republican of North Dakota. It's great to have you this morning. We ask everyone basically start with the same question. Give us your thoughts on how Phase 3 is working and on whether a Phase 4 is something that you support and what it should include.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Joe. Before we get to a Phase 4, I'd like to see how Phase 3 is working. And in the early stages, the Paycheck Protection Program, that's that small business piece, the $350 billion, that it's a grant disguised as a loan for the most part to keep people in their jobs. It's good for small business, good for employees. And watching Steve's piece, clearly it's popular with the American people as well. But there's also an overwhelming demand for it. So I think Senator McConnell's decision to try and up that a little bit by a couple $100 billion or $250 billion, I think is what the president is requesting, I think is wildly popular with the Congress. Now, as I told the president on Friday, no low-hanging fruit goes without becoming leverage for someone else to do something that they want to do. And, we now know that there's a desire for some more for hospitals. That's probably appropriate. I think we need to focus on the pandemic itself and the disease itself. And there's quite a bit of desire for some states and local governments who are not only having costs of dealing with the pandemic itself, but lost revenue to their coffers as well. So I could see some tweaking here and there, but I'd hate to get too far afield from those high priorities that both the public and I think the Congress feels are important.
But I think you think that maybe infrastructure at this point, you agree with President Trump, zero interest rates, and we've neglected a lot of this for a long time. You think that somehow comes into play, whether it's a Phase 4 or even a separate way to do things?
Well, I think you raised a really good point. I've been an advocate for an infrastructure package for a long time, as has the president. I'm not sure I share his zeal for debt, even if it's zero interest. He's a businessman. He sees debt as leverage. I see debt as debt. But I do think if we're going to do something big, now is the time to do it, because it has, I really think it's sort of the perfect stimulus, to be honest with you. It has as its primary purpose the supply chain of goods and services in this country, the profitability of the private sector. It has been neglected for a long time. And if we're going to go deeper than what the Highway Trust Fund provides, which is woefully inadequate for the needs, then now is the time to borrow the money and do it. But it really does put people to work pretty much instantly, and it'll enhance the equipment sales, it will enhance salaries and wages, and more importantly, it enhances an infrastructure that's critical. And I wouldn't just confine it to highway infrastructure either. There's a lot of transportation infrastructure that moves goods and services on other means than just highways and bridges.
Senator, wanted to ask you about the word that you just mentioned, which is debt. We're in the midst of a crisis, so stimulus is something clearly that is needed to get us back to work and get the system and the economic machine working again. But at some point, we're going to have a conversation about debt. And I'm not arguing for austerity either. But the question I'd ask you is, from a policy perspective, longer term, how you think that's going to play out in the form of either higher taxes, in the form of less services. How do you think about it, Senator?
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, we have got to deal with the mandatory side of the ledger, or we're never going to get to balance. We know that 2/3 of our debt, at least, is driven by the mandatory side of our ledger, the entitlement programs and other things. We simply have more money going out than can come into those programs. You ask, what should be on the table? I think it should all be on the table. I may have my preferences. I may, prefer one side or another, whether it's tax increases or cuts in services. I think changing some of the formulas is appropriate. But what I don't think we can do is start a conversation, certainly not a bipartisan conversation, by saying what's not on the table. We simply have to put it all out there. We have an opportunity with these low interest rates. The president talks a lot about even restructuring our own nation's debt. I think that's appropriate. I think Secretary Mnuchin as well has talked about doing some of that. But in the long run, we have to have as much revenue coming in as going out, and that's going to take a tough conversation. But the other thing is, Andrew, we have to have the discussion. So many in the political arena don't want to talk about it because they know when you start talking about the insolvency of Social Security or Medicare or, the funding for Medicaid, it becomes very difficult at a re-election time. So we just have to be willing to bite that bullet and have the adult conversation that a lot of us have been trying to have for a long time.
Hey, Senator, real quickly, you don't mince words here about Saudi Arabia and Russia and what we need to do. American independent oil producers cracked the code to the energy renaissance, but Saudi Arabia and Russia want to put them out of business by exploiting a global pandemic. So you're ready for the president to do whatever to either who's the bigger violator, do you think here? Saudi Arabia, Russia, or they're both bad?
Well, they're both bad, Joe, but the biggest disappointment is Saudi Arabia. Here is a country that's supposed to be an ally. Here's a country where we have 2,500 troops stationed. We have at least 4 major missile defense batteries that are protecting not only the kingdom, but largely protecting their oil assets. And, of course, we have a Navy that escorts their ships. All the while, they're taking advantage of the downturn in demand due to the pandemic and other factors. And instead of cutting back production, they're increasing production, filling up everything, including swimming pools, it appears. And it's going to kill our shale industry, especially the independents, if we don't do something about it. So I'm grateful that the president has reached out. I have tried to carry a big stick in this, as you mentioned. I'm all for pulling out of Saudi Arabia, pulling our troops out of Saudi Arabia. This is not how friends treat friends. And I don't know why we'd protect their oil assets when they declare war on ours. So we need to do it all. And the president's thrown tariffs on the table as a possible discussion point, whether it's through 301 investigation of anti-dumping or whether it's 232 authority that he has for national defense. I think both are appropriate. The most important thing, though, is to change their behavior. And then, of course, we need to get demand back up. And the only way to do that is to solve this pandemic.
Okay. Senator, thanks.
My pleasure.
Good luck. Thank you. Appreciate it.